Hello. For our first episode of Coin Shorts, we're going to talk about the farthing tokens of the early 17th century. For those not familiar with Old British and English coins, a farthing is a quarter of an old, pre-decimal penny. Originally the only minted coin of England was the silver penny. To pay smaller amounts, people had to cut the coin into halves or quarters. This was sometimes done at the mints, using the cross design on the reverse as a guide. Round silver halfpennies were trialled under Henry I, 1100 to 1135, and farthings under Henry III, 1216 to 1272, with halfpennies becoming more common from Edward I onwards, 1272 to 1307. However, the rising price of silver meant that by the time of Elizabeth I, 1558 to 1603, a correctly valued farthing would weigh 2 grains, or about 1/8 of a gram. This made them impractical to mint and handle, and so production essentially ceased. Historians believe that between around 1300 and the late 1600s there was an almost continual shortage of low-denomination coins. To compensate for this shortage, people began using unofficial lead and copper reckoning tokens called jettons. The issue of a shortage was repeatedly raised in Parliament, where people complained a poor man was forced to cut up his penny to buy his victuals, and that because no one had small change, money wasn't being given over to beggars. As well as cutting up their coins, people began using foreign coins, such as those of Scotland. Those in Parliament complained that this lack of standardisation was defrauding the English people. Businesses too began producing their own lead tokens in the 16th century to make up this shortfall in a local situation. When James I, 1603 to 1625, came to the throne, he attempted to stop the unofficial tokens by authorising the minting of royal farthing tokens through proclamation in 1613. These were to be small, a minimum of 6 grains or about 0.39 grams, copper tokens featuring a crown and 2 sceptres on the obverse and a crowned harp on the reverse. However, these were still technically tokens, not legal tender. James essentially sold the right to mint these tokens, hoping to make some money in the process. The first farthing tokens were issued by Lord Harrington, and later his son, then widow, to be used in England, Wales and Ireland. To encourage their adoption, they were given out at a rate of 21 shillings worth of farthings for each 20 shillings worth of sterling given over. Everyone from mayors to constables were encouraged to help in their distribution. Because it cost less to make the tokens than they were worth, both James and Harrington hoped to make a tidy profit. James had originally promised to split the money 50-50, but ended up changing it to give £35,000 of the projected £60,000 profit to himself. However, the tokens proved unpopular. Several counties refused to use them, and even those that did took fewer than was hoped. Unscrupulous businessmen tried to take advantage of the gain of a shilling per pound sterling of farthings by buying large quantities and using them to pay workers' wages. In 1616 this was stopped by reducing the issue to only 20 shillings worth of tokens per 20 shillings worth of sterling. The tokens weren't trusted either, with rumours that the new design was going to be introduced and render the old ones worthless being common. Proclamations had to be put out again forbidding the use of unofficial tokens in 1615 and yet again in 1622 in Ireland. Yet still the production of these tokens continued, with Lady Harrington selling the patent to the Duke of Lennox. The Duke of Lennox became Duke of Richmond, and his son continued to produce the coins under Charles I, 1625 to 1649. The patent was then given in 1634 to Lord Maltravers. Counterfeiting of the tokens had been an increasing problem under Charles I, and so in 1636 the design was changed to the so-called rose farthing, which featured a metal plug of brass in the copper, an early example of a bimetallic coin. This had the effect of making counterfeiting almost impossible. Counterfeiting had worked so well in part because of profit that James I had hoped to make. The minimum weight of an official token was set at 6 grains. This gave them an intrinsic value of much less than a quarter of a penny. A forger, paying approximately 1 shilling for a pound weight of copper, could make around 24 shillings 3 pence worth of farthing tokens. This meant a forger could make a large profit without having to undercut the official weight, as they would have had to do with a contemporary silver coin. From 1642 to 1651, the English Civil War raged, and England was governed as a Commonwealth between 1649 and 1660. No farthings were issued by the Commonwealth, though patterns were produced, and private tokens again proliferated. With England a monarchy again following the Restoration, Charles II, 1660 to 1685, set about finally fixing the problem. The Royal Mint was authorised to produce copper halfpennies and farthings as legal tender, though because of difficulties the coins ended up being imported from Sweden, with the face value being based on the metal content less production cost. Thus were the unpopular tokens at last done away with. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed learning about the strange exploits of the farthing tokens of James and Charles. See you next time.